When Maria Santos won $347 million in the state lottery, she thought her biggest problem would be deciding between the lump sum and annual payments. She never imagined her own family would become her worst enemies, demanding she hand over the money because they deserved it more than she did. What they discovered instead would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman they had dismissed for 23 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria Santos had always been the invisible daughter in the Rodriguez family constellation. At 31, she remained unmarried, childless, and, according to her extended family, tragically unsuccessful. Her modest apartment in the working-class neighborhood of East Hartford felt like a fortress against their constant judgment, though even fortress walls couldn't block the whispered conversations that followed her to every family gathering. The Rodriguez family hierarchy had been established decades ago by her late grandfather, Don Eduardo, who built a successful restaurant chain from a single taco truck. When he passed, the golden crown of family patriarch fell naturally to Maria's uncle, Roberto Rodriguez, who had inherited both the business acumen and the imperious attitude that came with being the eldest son. Uncle Roberto owned 17 restaurants across 3 states, a sprawling mansion in West Hartford's prestigious Prospect Avenue, and an ego that required constant feeding. Maria's father, Carlos, had chosen a different path entirely. Instead of joining the family restaurant empire, he became a postal worker, spending 30 years delivering mail through rain, snow, and the relentless criticism of his more successful brother. Her mother, Carmen, worked as a seamstress at a local alteration shop, her skilled hands mending other people's expensive clothes while wearing discount store outfits herself. Growing up in a 2-bedroom ranch house with aluminum siding and a chain-link fence, Maria learned early that love in the Rodriguez family was measured in dollars and achievements. Her cousins, Roberto's children, became the golden standards against which she was perpetually compared. Isabella, the eldest, married a cardiovascular surgeon and lived in a colonial mansion with a 3-car garage. Miguel owned 2 successful automotive dealerships and drove a different luxury car each day of the week. Even the youngest, Patricia, had married into money and spent her days organizing charity galas for causes she couldn't pronounce. The monthly family dinners at Uncle Roberto's mansion were exercises in endurance for Maria and her immediate family. The dining room, with its imported Italian marble table and crystal chandelier that cost more than her parents' annual income, became a courtroom where their worth was perpetually on trial. Roberto would hold court at the head of the table, regaling guests with stories of his latest business conquests while subtly reminding everyone of their place in the family ecosystem. Maria remembered the exact moment she understood her position in this hierarchy. She was 12 years old, sitting in Roberto's massive living room during Christmas Eve dinner, when she overheard her Aunt Esperanza talking to Isabella in the kitchen. The conversation drifted through the arched doorway as they prepared dessert, their voices carrying the particular tone women use when they think they're speaking privately. "It's such a shame about Carlos and his family," Esperanza had said, arranging flan on delicate china plates. "They try so hard, but some people just aren't meant for more than they have. Look at little Maria, sweet girl, but she'll probably end up working at the post office like her father. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Isabella had laughed, a sound like ice cubes clinking in expensive crystal. "At least she's not causing trouble. Some people know their place and stay there. It's almost admirable in its own way." That night, 12-year-old Maria lay in the guest bedroom of Uncle Roberto's house, staring at the ceiling and making a promise to herself that she would prove them all wrong. She didn't know how or when, but someday she would show them that their assumptions about her were as wrong as everything else they believed about worth and success. School became Maria's sanctuary and her weapon. While her cousins coasted through private academies with tutors and college counselors smoothing their paths, Maria attacked her education at the overcrowded public high school with the intensity of someone who knew it was her only ticket out. She worked part-time at a local grocery store to help with family expenses, studied until her eyes burned, and graduated valedictorian with a full scholarship to the University of Connecticut. The family's reaction to her academic achievements was telling. Uncle Roberto congratulated her with the same tone one might use to praise a pet for learning a new trick. Education is wonderful, he proclaimed at the graduation dinner, raising his wine glass in a toast that felt more like a consolation prize. Though, of course, for women, the real success comes from finding a good husband and building a family. All the degrees in the world can't replace that kind of fulfillment. Aunt Esperanza nodded sagely, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured. Isabella had 3 marriage proposals before she finished college. The right kind of woman attracts the right kind of man. It's all about knowing how to present yourself. Maria had chosen to study library science, a decision that prompted eye rolls and barely sealed snickers from her extended family. Books, Patricia had said, with the kind of pity usually reserved for terminal diagnoses. Well, someone has to work in libraries, I suppose. Very noble in its own quiet way. College provided 4 years of blessed distance from the family dynamics, but graduation brought the inevitable return to Hartford and the suffocating weight of their expectations. The job market for librarians was competitive, and Maria spent 6 months living with her parents, applying for positions, and enduring weekly dinners where Uncle Roberto would offer unsolicited career advice. "You know, Maria," he said one evening, cutting into a prime rib that cost more than her parents spent on groceries in a month, "I've been thinking about your situation. One of my restaurant managers is getting married and moving to Florida. I could create a position for you, assistant manager at the downtown location. Good steady work and family taking care of family." The offer hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Maria understood the subtext perfectly. Roberto was offering her a place in his empire, but it would be a permanent admission that she belonged in the shadows, grateful for whatever scraps the successful branch of the family chose to throw her way. "That's very generous," she had replied carefully, "but I'd like to keep trying for library positions. I think I'd be good at that work." Roberto's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the way a cat's does when it realizes the mouse might actually escape. Of course, of course. Chase your dreams while you're young. Just remember, family businesses provide security that following fantasies never can. When Maria finally landed a position as a junior librarian at the Hartford Public Library, the salary was modest, but the work felt like coming home. She found peace among the stacks, helping patrons find information, organizing community programs, and slowly building a reputation as someone who could locate any resource, no matter how obscure. Her apartment was small but comfortable, furnished with secondhand finds that she refinished herself and books that lined every available wall. The family's response to her career choice was a masterclass in damning with faint praise. "A librarian," Isabella had mused at Maria's 30th birthday dinner, as if testing how the word felt in her mouth. How wonderfully stable! No stress, regular hours, good benefits. Perfect for someone who values simplicity over ambition. Miguel had been more direct in his assessment. "Honestly, Maria, I admire people who are content with modest goals. Not everyone needs to chase wealth and success. The world needs workers too." These comments stung precisely because they contained enough truth to burrow under her skin. Maria did value stability and simplicity, but not because she lacked ambition. She had chosen a profession that fed her soul rather than her bank account, a concept that seemed entirely foreign to her family. Her work gave her purpose, even if it didn't give her prestige. The years passed in a comfortable routine that her family interpreted as stagnation. Maria's daily life consisted of early morning walks through Bushnell Park, coffee at a local cafe where the baristas knew her order, and long days at the library, helping everyone from elementary school students with book reports to elderly patrons learning to use computers. Her evenings were spent reading, attending community theater productions, and volunteering at a literacy program for adult learners. She dated occasionally, but the men she met through work or community activities were librarians, teachers, and social workers. Good people with kind hearts and modest incomes who seemed like romantic failures to a family that measured love by the size of engagement rings and the square footage of wedding venues. "Maria needs to put herself out there more," Esperanza would say during family gatherings, her voice carrying the particular concern reserved for hopeless cases. "She's still attractive enough to catch someone decent, but time isn't on her side. Women her age can't be too picky." Roberto had tried playing matchmaker several times, introducing Maria to business associates who were either recently divorced or had never married for reasons that became apparent within minutes of conversation. These setups invariably ended with awkward dinners where men twice her age explained how a librarian would make an ideal second wife because she would be grateful for the opportunity and wouldn't demand too much attention. The most memorable of these disasters had been dinner with Eduardo Morales, a 53-year-old restaurant supply company owner who spent 2 hours explaining why younger women made better wives because they were more moldable. "You seem like you'd be low maintenance," he had told Maria over dessert, as if this were the highest compliment imaginable. "A man my age needs peace at home, not drama and demands for constant entertainment." Maria had excused herself to the bathroom and slipped out the back exit of the restaurant, leaving Eduardo to explain to the waiter why his date had vanished between the creme brulee and the check. These experiences reinforced the family narrative that Maria was destined for spinsterhood, a fate they discussed with the kind of resigned sadness usually reserved for chronic illnesses. At family gatherings, she became the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when women focused on careers instead of catching husbands while their biological clocks still had time left. "It's not too late," Patricia would say with the earnest concern of someone offering false hope to the terminally ill. "Look at my friend Sandra. She met her husband at 42 through a dating service. He's not much to look at, and he has 3 kids from his first marriage, but she's married now, and that's what matters." The conversation around Maria's life always seemed to circle back to what she lacked rather than what she had accomplished. Her master's degree in library science earned from the University of Connecticut while working full-time was dismissed as more schooling. Her promotion to head of community outreach was described as a nice little advancement. Her volunteer work teaching adults to read was keeping busy with hobbies. Meanwhile, her cousin's achievements were celebrated with the fanfare usually reserved for Nobel Prize announcements. Isabella's husband's latest surgical technique was front-page news in the family newsletter that Esperanza circulated monthly. Miguel's expansion to a 3rd dealership warranted a celebration dinner with champagne that cost more than Maria's monthly grocery budget. Patricia's successful organization of a charity auction for the country club was treated as if she had personally solved world hunger. The contrast became most stark during gift-giving occasions. When Isabella redecorated her living room, the family contributed to her purchase of a handcrafted Italian leather sofa that cost $15,000. When Miguel's son graduated from private high school, relatives pitched in for a luxury car that served as both graduation present and demonstration of family status. When Patricia's daughter made the equestrian team at her boarding school, everyone contributed to the purchase of a horse that lived in a stable nicer than Maria's apartment. Maria's milestones received gifts appropriate to someone of lesser status: a modest gift card when she completed her master's degree, a small potted plant when she received her promotion, a book about finding love after 30 when she turned 31, which felt more like advice than celebration. The message was consistent and clear. Maria was the family member who needed help, not the one who deserved celebration. She was the recipient of charity, not the provider of success stories. She was the cautionary tale that made everyone else's achievements shine brighter by comparison. This dynamic might have continued indefinitely, with Maria settling into the role of beloved but disappointing family member, if not for a decision she made on an ordinary Tuesday evening in March. Walking home from the library after a particularly long day dealing with budget cuts and staffing shortages, she stopped at the corner market where she occasionally bought lottery tickets. Not because she believed in winning, but because the $2 investment bought her a few minutes of imagining different possibilities. The elderly man behind the counter, Mr. Chen, had become something of a friend over the years. He knew her regular numbers, the birthdays of her parents and grandparents, and always asked about her work at the library. "Same numbers today, Miss Maria?" he asked, already reaching for the lottery ticket machine. "Actually," Maria said, surprising herself, "let me try something different tonight. Quick pick, please." Mr. Chen raised an eyebrow, but processed the random selection without comment. The ticket printed with a mechanical whir, and Maria tucked it into her wallet without looking at the numbers. It was such a small deviation from routine that she forgot about it entirely until 3 days later, when she was reorganizing her purse and found the crumpled piece of paper. The lottery drawing had been the night before, and Maria found herself curious enough to check the numbers on her phone while eating breakfast. She read the winning sequence twice before the reality began to sink in.
Then she read them again, comparing each digit to the numbers on her ticket with the methodical care of someone who processed information for a living.
The match was perfect. Every single number aligned in exact sequence. Maria Santos, quiet librarian and family disappointment, had just won $347 million. She sat at her small kitchen table for 20 minutes, staring at the ticket and the winning numbers displayed on her phone screen, waiting for the mistake to reveal itself. But numbers don't lie, and after 2 decades of working with information, Maria knew how to verify facts. She checked the lottery website, called the automated number, and even drove to Mr. Chen's store to have him scan the ticket through the machine. Each verification produced the same impossible result. The modest librarian who couldn't catch a decent husband and worked at a job her family considered glorified clerical work had just become one of the wealthiest people in Connecticut. The first person she told was her mother, driving to her parents' house in a daze and finding Carmen in the kitchen preparing dinner. The conversation that followed would replay in Maria's mind for months afterward, not because of her mother's reaction, but because of how quickly news traveled through the Rodriguez family network. "Mija, are you feeling all right?" Carmen had asked when Maria sat down at the kitchen table without speaking. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Maria placed the lottery ticket on the table between them. "Mama, I think I won the lottery." Carmen glanced at the piece of paper and continued stirring the rice. "That's nice, sweetheart. How much?" $347 million. The wooden spoon clattered to the floor as Carmen turned to stare at her daughter. "What did you say?" The verification process that followed involved Carlos being called home from his evening walk, multiple trips to different stores to confirm the ticket's validity, and eventually a phone call to the lottery office that confirmed what Maria already knew. The quiet daughter, who had never caused trouble or demanded attention, had just won the largest lottery jackpot in the state's history. Within hours, the news had spread through the family with the speed of gossip in a small town. Maria's phone began ringing before she had even decided whether to take the lump sum or annual payments. The first call came from Isabella, her voice reaching octaves that would have impressed opera singers. "Maria! Oh my God, Maria! I just heard from Mama. Is it true? Did you really win? This is incredible! We need to talk immediately. There's so much to discuss." The calls that followed came in waves. Miguel offering his services as a financial advisor, despite having no qualifications beyond owning car dealerships. Patricia suggesting they plan a family celebration that would be worthy of this magnitude of blessing. Esperanza already making lists of family members who would need help now that there was money to distribute. But it was Uncle Roberto's call that revealed the true nature of what Maria was about to face. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted his right to make decisions for other people. "Maria, we need to have a family meeting immediately. This kind of money requires careful management, and frankly, you're going to need guidance from people who understand wealth. I've already spoken to my financial advisors, and they're prepared to help structure everything properly. The most important thing right now is making sure this windfall benefits the entire family, not just one person." Maria had listened to her uncle's assumption that he would naturally take control of her newfound wealth with a growing sense of familiar frustration. Even when she had won more money than he could earn in multiple lifetimes, Roberto still spoke to her as if she were a child who needed adult supervision. "I appreciate your concern, Uncle Roberto, but I haven't even decided what I'm going to do yet. I need time to think." "Time to think?" Roberto's voice sharpened with the tone he used when restaurant employees questioned his decisions. "Maria, this isn't a decision you make alone. This money affects the entire family. We have responsibilities to each other. And frankly, someone with your background isn't equipped to handle this level of financial complexity. You could lose everything through poor decisions." The conversation ended with Roberto informing her that a family meeting had been scheduled for Sunday dinner at his house, where they would discuss the family's new situation and make appropriate plans for everyone's benefit. Maria hung up the phone with the dawning realization that winning the lottery hadn't changed her position in the family hierarchy. She was still the person who needed guidance, still the one whose decisions required approval from those who considered themselves her betters.
The only difference was that now her family believed they had a claim to her good fortune. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls, text messages, and family members showing up at her apartment unannounced to discuss the situation. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial congratulations and expressions of joy, followed by immediate suggestions about how the money should be handled, and inevitable assumptions that Maria would naturally want to share her windfall with family members who had always been there for her. By Sunday morning, Maria understood that the family meeting at Roberto's house would not be a celebration of her good fortune. It would be a negotiation session where people who had spent years dismissing her would explain why they deserved a portion of money they had played no role in winning. She arrived at Uncle Roberto's mansion that evening carrying a secret that would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet librarian they had underestimated for 31 years. But first, she would let them reveal exactly who they really were when money was on the table. The stage was set for a confrontation that would tear apart decades of family pretense and reveal the true nature of relationships that had been built on assumptions rather than genuine understanding. Maria Santos, the disappointing daughter who had never quite measured up to family expectations, was about to discover just how much her relatives valued her as a person versus what they thought she could provide them. The lottery ticket in her purse was worth $347 million, but the education she was about to receive about her family's true nature would prove to be far more valuable in the long run.
The marble foyer of Uncle Roberto's mansion had never felt more like a courtroom than it did that Sunday evening. Maria stood beneath the crystal chandelier that had witnessed decades of family gatherings, but tonight the familiar space felt charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. The usual warmth of extended family coming together had been replaced by something more calculating, more predatory. Esperanza greeted her at the door with an embrace that lasted longer than usual, her fingers seeming to assess the fabric of Maria's simple black dress as if trying to determine whether she had already begun spending her newfound wealth. "Mija, you look tired. This must be so overwhelming for you. Thank goodness you have family to help you through such a complicated situation." The gathering in Roberto's living room resembled a board meeting more than a family dinner. Instead of the usual scattered seating arrangements where people chatted in small groups, chairs had been arranged in a semicircle facing the massive leather armchair where Roberto typically held court. The setup was deliberate, designed to create a sense of formality and importance around what was clearly intended to be a presentation rather than a discussion. Isabella sat with her husband, Dr. Richard Vaughn, their posture suggesting they had already discussed their position extensively before arriving. Richard's presence felt particularly ominous since he rarely attended family gatherings, claiming that his surgical schedule made social commitments difficult. Tonight, however, he sat beside his wife with the attentive expression of someone who had suddenly discovered a compelling reason to engage with his in-laws. Miguel had positioned himself near Roberto's chair, assuming the role of lieutenant in whatever campaign was about to unfold. His wife, Sophia, remained notably absent, their marriage having grown strained over financial pressures that Miguel had hidden from the family for months. Patricia sat with her husband, Kenneth, a real estate developer whose projects had been struggling in the current market, though he maintained the appearance of success through careful wardrobe choices and strategic name-dropping. Maria's parents occupied chairs slightly apart from the main grouping, their body language suggesting they felt as uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere as she did. Carlos kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit from his postal service days when he had to attend disciplinary meetings with supervisors. Carmen clutched her purse as if it contained something precious that might be taken from her. The conversation before dinner consisted of elaborate congratulations that felt more like negotiations, opening statements. Isabella spoke about the importance of wise financial planning, mentioning several times that Richard had experience managing significant assets through his medical practice and investment portfolio. Miguel emphasized his business acumen, describing recent deals that demonstrated his understanding of complex financial structures. Patricia contributed observations about tax implications and estate planning, knowledge she claimed to have gained through Kenneth's real estate ventures. Each family member seemed determined to establish their credentials as someone qualified to advise Maria on managing her windfall, though none of them had ever possessed or managed anything approaching the amount she had won. The irony was not lost on Maria that people who had spent years dismissing her intelligence and judgment now considered themselves experts on wealth management simply because they had always possessed more money than she did. Roberto called for attention as they moved into the dining room, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Before we begin dinner, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Maria's extraordinary good fortune presents both opportunities and responsibilities that affect all of us. The table had been set with Roberto's finest china and crystal, as if the formal presentation would lend gravity to whatever proposals were about to be presented. Maria noticed that she had been seated in a position where she faced the entire family, creating a visual dynamic that made her feel like a defendant facing a jury. First, Roberto continued, standing at the head of the table with a wineglass in hand, we need to acknowledge that this kind of sudden wealth can be dangerous without proper guidance. Statistics show that most lottery winners lose everything within 5 years because they lack the experience and knowledge to handle large sums responsibly. Isabella nodded sagely, her expression conveying deep concern for Maria's welfare. The psychological impact alone can be devastating. Suddenly having access to unlimited resources can lead to poor decision-making, especially for someone who has never had to manage significant assets before. Dr. Vaughn contributed his medical perspective with the clinical detachment that made him successful in the operating room. We see similar patterns with patients who receive large insurance settlements. The stress of sudden financial responsibility can manifest in anxiety, depression, and impulsive behaviors that ultimately destroy their financial security. Maria listened to her family discuss her psychological fitness to manage her own money, with the growing realization that they had already decided she was incompetent to make financial decisions, simply because she had been poor until 5 days ago. The condescension was breathtaking in its completeness. Miguel leaned forward with the earnest expression of someone delivering crucial information. The tax implications alone are staggering. Without proper planning, the government will take 40% right off the top, and that's before state taxes and other considerations. You need professional guidance immediately, or you'll lose millions before you even understand what you've won. Kenneth nodded with the authority of someone who supposedly dealt with large financial transactions regularly. Estate planning becomes critical immediately. Without proper structuring, this windfall could create tax burdens for your heirs that would force them to liquidate assets just to pay what they owe to the government. The conversation continued through the first course, with each family member contributing expertise they claimed to possess while carefully avoiding any direct requests for money. Instead, they built a case for Maria's fundamental inability to handle her situation without their guidance and support. Patricia offered insights about investment strategies she had supposedly learned through Kenneth's business dealings. Diversification is absolutely critical. Keeping large amounts in simple savings accounts is financially irresponsible when there are so many opportunities for growth through real estate, stocks, and business ventures. Roberto reclaimed control of the narrative as the main course was served, his voice taking on the tone he used when delivering important business presentations. What we're really discussing here is family legacy. This money doesn't just belong to Maria. It belongs to all of us, because family wealth should benefit the entire family, not just one individual. The statement hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Maria felt the room's energy shift as Roberto moved from offering advice to making claims on her money. This was the moment she had been expecting, though hearing it stated so directly still felt like a physical blow. Consider the opportunities this creates for everyone, Roberto continued, warming to his theme. Isabella and Richard could expand their medical practice, maybe open that specialized clinic they've been discussing. Miguel could finally acquire the luxury car dealership he's been pursuing. Patricia and Kenneth could invest in prime real estate while the market is favorable. Each suggestion was presented as if it would be a favor to Maria, allowing her to share her good fortune with family members who would put the money to better use than she could manage alone. The underlying assumption was that her role would be that of a grateful benefactor, writing checks to support other people's dreams while they managed the complex business of being wealthy. Isabella took over the presentation with the smooth efficiency of someone who had rehearsed her talking points. We've actually been discussing this all week, and we think the best approach would be to establish a family foundation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That way, the money could benefit everyone, while providing tax advantages and ensuring that decisions are made collectively by people with experience managing assets. The proposal that followed revealed the extent of their planning. Roberta would serve as the foundation's president, with Isabella handling medical and educational philanthropy, Miguel managing business investments, and Patricia overseeing real estate acquisitions. Maria would be provided with an annual allowance from the foundation, generous enough to live comfortably while ensuring that the bulk of the money remained under professional management. The beauty of this approach, Miguel explained with the enthusiasm of someone describing a brilliant business strategy, is that it protects you from the pressures and responsibilities of managing hundreds of millions of dollars, while ensuring that the money stays in the family and continues to grow through smart investments. Dr. Vaughn contributed the medical perspective that made the proposal sound almost therapeutic. The stress relief alone would be worth millions. Instead of agonizing over investment decisions and worrying about losing everything, you could focus on your work at the library while knowing that your financial future is secure and professionally managed. Patricia emphasized the social benefits with the tone of someone describing a rescue operation. You wouldn't have to deal with people approaching you for money or trying to take advantage of your generosity. The foundation would handle all of that, protecting you from situations you're not equipped to navigate. The proposal was presented as a gift to Maria, a generous offer from family members who were willing to sacrifice their time and expertise to save her from the burden of managing wealth she had never asked for. They spoke about her best interests with the confidence of people who had never doubted their right to make decisions for someone they considered less capable than themselves. Carlos and Carmen remained silent throughout the presentation, their expressions suggesting they were as stunned by the audacity of the proposal as Maria felt. Her father's hands were clenched in his lap, his knuckles white with the effort of restraining himself from speaking. Her mother kept glancing at Maria with eyes that seemed to be apologizing for the behavior of relatives who shared their blood but not their values. Roberto concluded the presentation with the satisfied expression of someone who had delivered an irrefutable argument. Obviously, this is a lot to process, and we don't expect an immediate decision, but I think you can see that we've put considerable thought into the best way to handle this situation for everyone's benefit. The silence that followed felt heavy with expectation. Maria realized that her family was waiting for her to express gratitude for their willingness to take responsibility for managing her money. They expected her to be relieved that people with experience handling wealth were offering to save her from the complexity of financial decision-making. Instead, Maria placed her fork beside her plate and looked around the table at faces that had become suddenly unfamiliar. These were people who had known her for 31 years, who had watched her graduate valedictorian from high school, earn a master's degree while working full-time, and build a respected career in public service. Yet they spoke about her as if she were mentally incapable of managing her own financial affairs. "That's very thoughtful," she said finally, her voice carrying none of the gratitude they were clearly expecting. "You've obviously spent a lot of time planning how to spend my money." Isabella's smile faltered slightly at Maria's tone. "It's not about spending your money, Maria. It's about protecting it and making sure it benefits the family as a whole instead of just one person." "Benefits the family," Maria repeated slowly, as if testing how the words felt in her mouth. "Tell me, Isabella, when you and Richard bought your house, did you consult the family about how your money should be spent? Did you establish a foundation to ensure that your surgical income benefited everyone equally?" Isabella's expression shifted from concerned sympathy to irritated confusion. "That's completely different. Richard and I earned our money through years of education and hard work. We built our wealth through strategic planning and professional excellence." "Whereas I just got lucky," Maria said, her voice remaining perfectly calm despite the anger building in her chest. Miguel attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground with the diplomatic skills that served him well in business negotiations.
No one is questioning your right to the money, Maria. We're simply offering to help you manage it responsibly. This kind of windfall requires expertise that none of us have individually, but together we have the knowledge and experience to make sure it's handled properly. Together, Maria echoed, meaning you would make decisions about my money while I receive an allowance like a child getting pocket money from her parents. Roberto's patience was beginning to fray, his voice taking on the edge he used when employees questioned his authority. Maria, I understand this is overwhelming, but you're being unnecessarily defensive. We're trying to help you, not take advantage of you. The fact is, you don't have experience managing significant wealth, and without guidance, you're likely to make costly mistakes. The condescension in his tone was so familiar that Maria felt transported back to childhood, sitting at the same table while adults discussed her future as if she weren't present. The only difference was that now she had something they wanted, and their paternalistic concern barely concealed their sense of entitlement to her good fortune. Patricia attempted a different approach, her voice carrying the syrupy sweetness she used when trying to convince people to volunteer for her charity events. We love you, Maria, and we want what's best for you. That's why we're willing to take on the responsibility of managing this money. It would actually be a burden for us, but we're family, and family takes care of each other. The assertion that managing $347 million would be a burden they were willing to accept out of love struck Maria as so absurd that she almost laughed. Instead, she looked around the table at relatives who had spent decades treating her like a disappointing charity case, and now spoke as if they were offering her the greatest gift imaginable. Family takes care of each other, she repeated, her voice carrying a note that made several people shift uncomfortably in their chairs. When exactly did this family take care of me? When you seated my parents and me at the children's table until I was 25? When you offered me entry-level positions at your restaurants because you assumed I couldn't do better? When you spent years discussing my lack of marriage prospects as if I were damaged goods that needed to be moved at a discount? The accusation landed with the impact of a physical blow. Roberto's face flushed red with indignation and embarrassment, while Isabella's expression shifted from sympathetic concern to cold anger. Miguel looked genuinely confused, as if he couldn't understand why Maria would bring up ancient history when they were trying to discuss her financial future. Dr. Vaughn broke the uncomfortable silence with the clinical tone he used when delivering difficult diagnoses. I think the stress of this situation is causing some emotional volatility.
Sudden wealth can trigger psychological responses that make people feel persecuted, even when family members are trying to help. The suggestion that her response was a symptom of psychological instability rather than a rational reaction to their behavior pushed Maria past the point of polite restraint. She stood from the table with deliberate calm, her movement causing a ripple of tension throughout the room. You're absolutely right, Dr. Vaughn. This situation has definitely revealed some psychological issues, but they're not mine. She walked to the window that overlooked Roberto's perfectly manicured garden, gathering her thoughts while her family waited for her to continue. The view included the three-car garage where Miguel's latest luxury vehicle sat beside Roberto's Mercedes and Isabella's BMW, a visual reminder of the wealth that gave them the confidence to lecture her about financial management. When she turned back to face the table, her expression had shifted from defensive anger to something harder and more determined. You want to know what I've learned about family this week? I've learned that the same people who dismissed me as a failure when I was poor suddenly think they're entitled to my money now that I'm rich. I've learned that family members who never asked about my dreams or interests are now experts on what's best for my future. Roberto attempted to regain control of the situation with the authoritative tone that had served him well in business for 3 decades. Maria, you're being irrational. We're not trying to take your money. We're offering to help you manage it responsibly because we care about you and want to see you succeed. Succeed, Maria said, the word carrying more bitter amusement than Roberto had probably expected. Define success for me, Uncle Roberto. Is it having enough money to buy respect from people who should love you unconditionally? Is it being wealthy enough that family members finally consider your opinions worth hearing? The question hung in the air without an answer because everyone at the table understood that Roberto's definition of success had always been exactly what Maria had described. In the Rodriguez family hierarchy, money determined worth, and wealth commanded respect in ways that education, kindness, or personal integrity never could. Isabella attempted to salvage the situation with a return to concerned sympathy, though her voice carried less conviction than before. "We do love you, Maria. We always have. That's exactly why we want to protect you from making decisions that could destroy your financial security." "Protect me," Maria repeated, her voice growing quieter in a way that made everyone lean forward to hear her clearly. "The way you protected me when cousin Elena's wedding planner assumed I was the help because I was wearing a dress from Target? The way you protected me when Uncle Roberto introduced me to his business associates as the family member who chose books over money? The way you protected me every time someone made jokes about my unmarried status and you laughed along instead of defending me?" Each example hit its target with precision, bringing color to faces that had gone pale with embarrassment. These were not ancient grievances that Maria had been nursing in private. They were recent wounds that had been inflicted and dismissed as harmless family teasing by people who had never bothered to consider how their words might affect someone they considered beneath their social station. Carmen finally broke her silence, her voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed frustration. "Roberto, maybe you should listen to what Maria is saying instead of telling her how she should feel about it." The intervention from her sister-in-law caught Roberto off guard, partially because Carmen rarely spoke up during family gatherings, and partially because she had always been diplomatic in her approach to family conflicts. Her support for Maria shifted the dynamic in the room, creating an alliance that hadn't existed moments before. Carlos added his voice with the measured tone he used when dealing with difficult situations at work. "My daughter has been handling her own decisions for over a decade. She managed to get through college and graduate school while working multiple jobs. She's built a career that she finds meaningful and serves her community. Maybe the question isn't whether she can handle having money. Maybe the question is whether she can trust her family to respect her decisions about her own life." The challenge was direct and unavoidable. Roberto found himself in the unusual position of having his authority questioned, not just by Maria, but by family members he had always considered allies in maintaining the existing power structure. The solidarity was unexpected and clearly unwelcome. Miguel attempted to mediate with the diplomatic skills that had served him well in business negotiations. "I think we're all getting a little emotional here. The important thing is that we're family, and we need to work together to figure out the best way to handle this situation. Maybe we should take some time to cool down and approach this more rationally." "More rationally," Maria said, returning to the table but remaining standing. "Let me approach this rationally then. You're asking me to give you control over money that I won through my own decision to buy a lottery ticket with my own money that I earned through my own work. In exchange, you're offering to provide me with an allowance from my own windfall while you use the rest to fund your own business ventures and investment opportunities." The stark summary of their proposal stripped away the charitable language they had been using to disguise what amounted to a sophisticated form of theft. Presented without the emotional manipulation about family unity and financial protection, their plan revealed itself as an attempt to transfer Maria's wealth to people who felt more entitled to it than she was. Patricia made one final attempt to reframe the conversation in terms that might be more palatable. "You're making it sound like we're trying to steal from you, which is completely unfair. We're talking about keeping the money in the family and making sure it's used wisely instead of being wasted on things that don't matter." "Things that don't matter?" Maria repeated, her voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "Like what? What terrible mistakes do you imagine I might make with my own money?" The question revealed the underlying assumption that had driven their entire proposal. They believed that Maria, left to her own devices, would waste her windfall on frivolous purchases and poor investments because people of her background didn't understand how to handle serious money. Their intervention was necessary to save the money from someone they considered fundamentally unqualified to possess it. Roberto decided to address the question directly, perhaps believing that honesty would be more effective than continued manipulation.
Maria, you've never had to make decisions about significant amounts of money. You've never dealt with investment advisors, tax attorneys, or estate planners.
You don't understand the complexities of wealth management or the responsibilities that come with this level of financial resources. Unlike you, Maria said, her voice remaining dangerously calm, who inherited a successful restaurant chain from your father and expanded it using business loans secured by assets you didn't build yourself. The observation struck Roberto like a physical blow because it highlighted the uncomfortable truth that his own wealth had been largely inherited rather than created through the business acumen he claimed to possess. His expansion of the family restaurant business had been funded by banks that considered his inherited assets adequate collateral, not by investors who believed in his innovative business strategies. Isabella attempted to deflect the criticism by returning to her medical expertise. The psychological research on sudden wealth is very clear. Most people who acquire large amounts of money quickly end up worse off than they were before because they lack the emotional and intellectual framework to handle the responsibility. Most people, Maria said, or most poor people. The question hung in the air because everyone at the table understood the class implications of Isabella's statement. The assumption that Maria would be unable to handle wealth was based not on any assessment of her intelligence or character, but on their belief that people from her economic background were inherently less capable of managing money than those born into privilege. Dr. Vaughn attempted to provide scientific credibility to his wife's position. There are documented cases of lottery winners who lost everything within months because they made impulsive decisions based on emotions rather than rational financial planning. And there are documented cases of inherited wealth being squandered by people who never learned the value of money because they never had to earn it themselves, Maria countered. Which category do you think poses a bigger risk to my financial security? The comparison was uncomfortable because it forced them to confront the possibility that Maria might actually be better equipped to handle sudden wealth than people who had never experienced financial insecurity. Her years of careful budgeting and strategic decision-making under economic pressure had taught her skills that people born into wealth often never developed. Miguel made one final attempt to salvage their proposal by appealing to family loyalty. Maria, we're not your enemies. We're your family, and we want what's best for you. If you don't trust us to help you manage this money, who are you going to trust? Strangers who don't care about you the way we do? The question revealed the fundamental flaw in their entire approach. They assumed that caring about someone gave them the right to make decisions for that person, and they equated love with control in ways that Maria found deeply disturbing. You want to know who I trust to manage my money? She asked, looking around the table at faces that had become expectant despite their recent setbacks. I trust myself. The same person who managed to get through college without anyone's help. The same person who built a career that serves her community and provides personal fulfillment. The same person who won this lottery in the first place. The Declaration of Independence was delivered with quiet conviction that brooked no argument. Maria had made her decision, and no amount of family pressure or emotional manipulation was going to change her mind. She was keeping control of her own money, and she was going to make her own decisions about how to use it. Roberto's expression shifted from frustrated authority to something harder and more calculating. When persuasion failed, he had always been willing to use more direct forms of pressure to get what he wanted. Maria, I hope you understand the implications of what you're saying. Family relationships are built on mutual support and shared responsibility. If you're not willing to help family members who have always been there for you, then maybe you need to reconsider what family means to you. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Roberto was suggesting that Maria's refusal to share her windfall would result in her exclusion from family relationships that had supposedly provided her with love and support throughout her life. The irony was that those relationships had actually provided her with judgment and condescension rather than genuine affection. Maria looked around the table one final time, taking in the faces of relatives who had revealed themselves completely over the course of a single dinner conversation.
These were people who believed that money gave them the right to control other people's lives, and who measured love by financial generosity rather than genuine care and respect. You're absolutely right, Uncle Roberto. I do need to reconsider what family means to me, and I think I'm ready to share my decision about how I'm going to handle my lottery winnings. The room fell silent with anticipation, everyone leaning forward to hear what they hoped would be Maria's capitulation to their collective pressure. Instead, she was about to deliver news that would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet librarian they had so thoroughly underestimated. Maria reached into her purse and withdrew a manila folder that she placed carefully on Roberto's mahogany dining table. The gesture was deliberate and theatrical, designed to capture the attention of every person in the room. The folder looked ordinary enough, but the way Maria handled it suggested it contained information that would fundamentally alter the evening's trajectory. "Before I make any decisions about my lottery winnings," she said, her voice carrying a calm authority that seemed to surprise even herself, "I think there are some things you should know about the family member you've been offering to help manage my financial affairs." Roberto's expression shifted from frustrated authority to wary confusion. What kind of things? Maria opened the folder and removed a stack of documents, each page carefully organized and marked with colored tabs. "For the past 6 years, I've been doing more than just checking out books and organizing community programs at the library. I've also been managing investments." The statement hung in the air like an unexpected thunderclap. Isabella's eyebrows rose in skeptical surprise, while Miguel leaned forward with the expression of someone trying to process information that didn't align with his existing assumptions about his cousin's capabilities. "What kind of investments?" Dr. Vaughn asked, his clinical tone suggesting he was prepared to diagnose this as another symptom of lottery-induced psychological instability. Maria removed the first document from her stack and placed it where everyone could see the letterhead. "I started with $5,000 that I saved from my library salary over 2 years. Index funds, municipal bonds, some carefully researched individual stocks. Nothing exotic or risky, just patient, consistent investing based on research I did during my lunch breaks." Patricia's laugh carried a note of nervous dismissal. "Maria, $5,000 isn't really investing."
That's more like saving with extra steps. You're absolutely right, Maria agreed, removing another document. $5,000 wasn't much, but $5,000 invested consistently for 6 years, with all dividends reinvested and additional contributions every month, becomes something more substantial. She placed a quarterly statement from a major brokerage firm on the table. The account balance showed $237,000. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Every person at the table was doing rapid mental calculations, trying to understand how a librarian earning $42,000 annually had accumulated nearly $250,000 in investment accounts they had never known existed. Miguel recovered first, his business instincts kicking in despite his shock. That's actually pretty impressive returns. What kind of strategy were you using?" "Research," Maria said simply. "The same skills I use to help library patrons find information applied to financial markets. I read annual reports, analyzed earnings trends, studied market cycles. I treated investing like any other research project, methodical and thorough." Roberto's face had taken on a color that suggested his blood pressure was reaching dangerous levels. "You never mentioned any of this. Why would you keep investment success a secret from your family?" The question revealed the fundamental disconnect between Roberto's understanding of family dynamics and Maria's actual experience. In his world, financial success was currency that bought respect and influence. In Maria's experience, sharing good news with her family had historically resulted in minimization and subtle sabotage. "The same reason I never mentioned getting promoted to head of community outreach," Maria replied evenly. "Because every time I shared good news with this family, it was either dismissed as less impressive than it actually was, or turned into an opportunity to remind me that I still wasn't as successful as my cousins." Isabella attempted to regain control of the narrative with the patronizing tone she used when explaining complex medical concepts to patients she considered intellectually limited. Maria, $250,000 is certainly respectable for someone in your position, but it doesn't really qualify you to manage hundreds of millions. The scale is completely different. You're absolutely right again, Maria said, removing another set of documents from her folder. Which is why I've been expanding my investment activities over the past 3 years. The next document she placed on the table was a business registration form for Santos Financial Research, LLC, established 3 years earlier with Maria Santos listed as the sole proprietor. The business address was a post office box in downtown Hartford, and the stated purpose was investment research and financial consulting services. Carmen gasped audibly, the first sound she had made since defending her daughter earlier in the evening. Even she had been unaware of the extent of Maria's financial activities, though she had noticed her daughter's increasing interest in business publications and financial news over recent years. I started offering investment research services to small business owners and professionals who couldn't afford major financial advisory firms, Maria explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone discussing a subject she had mastered through years of dedicated study. Doctors, lawyers, small business owners who needed someone to analyze their investment options and provide recommendations based on thorough research rather than sales commissions. Miguel's expression had shifted from skeptical surprise to genuine interest. How many clients do you have? 43 regular clients, Maria replied, consulting her notes. I charge based on the complexity of their financial situation and the amount of research required. Some need simple portfolio analysis, others want comprehensive retirement planning or business investment strategies. Dr. Vaughn found his voice, though it carried less authority than usual. What kind of returns have you been generating for these clients? Maria removed a summary report and placed it on the table where everyone could see the numbers. Average annual returns of 11.7% over the past 3 years, compared to market averages of 8.2% during the same period. More importantly, none of my clients lost money during the market downturns in 2022 and 2023. The numbers were impossible to dismiss or minimize. Maria had not only been successful in managing her own investments, but she had built a consulting business that consistently outperformed professional financial advisors while protecting her clients from significant losses during volatile market periods. Patricia's voice carried a note of confusion that bordered on distress. Why didn't you ever tell us about any of this? We could have been clients. We could have been working together instead of... She trailed off, apparently realizing that finishing the sentence would require acknowledging how the family had actually treated Maria over the years. Because every time I mentioned being interested in financial markets or business strategy, someone in this family made jokes about librarians playing with money they didn't understand, Maria replied with the patience of someone who had anticipated this question. Because the one time I offered to help Uncle Roberto analyze a potential restaurant investment, he told me to stick to books and leave business to people who understood how the real world worked. Roberto's memory of that conversation was obviously returning, based on the uncomfortable expression that crossed his face. It had been during a family gathering 2 years earlier, when he was considering purchasing a struggling restaurant in a declining neighborhood. Maria had done research on foot traffic patterns, demographic trends, and local business development plans that suggested the investment would be unsuccessful. Roberto had dismissed her analysis without consideration, purchased the restaurant anyway, and closed it 14 months later after losing nearly $300,000. That was different, he said weakly. That was just, you were offering an opinion, not professional analysis. It was professional analysis, Maria corrected him. The same kind of research I do for clients who pay me $5,000 for comprehensive investment evaluation. The restaurant failed for exactly the reasons I identified in my report, which you never bothered to read. The revelation that Maria had prepared a formal report analyzing Roberto's failed investment added another layer of humiliation to an evening that was rapidly dismantling decades of family assumptions. Not only had she been capable of providing valuable business advice, but she had offered it for free to a family member who had dismissed her expertise without consideration. Isabella attempted to salvage some semblance of family authority with the tone she used when delivering difficult medical news. Even if you've been successful with smaller investments, Maria, this lottery money represents a completely different level of complexity. The tax implications alone require specialists who deal with ultra-high net worth individuals. Which brings me to the final document I wanted to share, Maria said, removing the last paper from her folder. This is a letter from Blackstone Wealth Management, one of the most prestigious financial advisory firms in the country. They've been trying to recruit me as a partner for the past 8 months. The letterhead was unmistakable, and the content visible to everyone at the table made their offer clear. Blackstone Wealth Management was inviting Maria to join their firm as a senior financial advisor with a guaranteed annual salary of $250,000 plus bonuses based on client performance. The letter specifically mentioned her track record of consistent returns and her ability to protect client assets during market volatility. They want me to manage portfolios for clients with assets between $10 and $50 million, Maria explained, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally been recognized for her true capabilities. Apparently, my research methodology and risk management strategies have attracted attention from people who actually understand wealth management at the highest levels. The silence that followed was different from the previous pauses in the conversation. This wasn't the quiet of people processing unexpected information. This was the silence of people realizing that everything they thought they knew about someone had been completely wrong. Miguel was the first to find his voice, though it carried none of its earlier confidence. You're saying that one of the top wealth management firms in the country wants to hire you to manage money for millionaires? But we've been sitting here explaining why you're not qualified to manage your own lottery winnings. That's exactly what I'm saying, Maria confirmed, and it raises some interesting questions about the assumptions this family has been making about my capabilities for the past decade. Roberto's face had progressed through several shades of red and was now approaching purple. Why would you keep something like this a secret? If you had these opportunities, why didn't you take them? Why are you still working at the library? The questions revealed Roberto's fundamental inability to understand motivations that weren't driven by money and status. In his worldview, anyone offered a prestigious, high-paying position would accept it immediately, regardless of personal satisfaction or values. Because I love my work at the library, Maria said simply. Because I believe in public service and community education. Because helping a 10-year-old discover a passion for reading is more fulfilling to me than helping a millionaire become slightly richer. Because not everything in life is about maximizing income and accumulating status symbols. The explanation was so foreign to Roberto's understanding of success that he seemed unable to process it. Someone who could earn $250,000 annually but chose to remain in a $42,000 job because she found it meaningful was operating according to values that made no sense within his framework of achievement and success. Patricia attempted to bridge the gap between her family's expectations and this new reality. But surely now, with the lottery money, you'll reconsider. You could take the position at Blackstone and really make something of yourself. Make something of myself, Maria repeated, her voice carrying a note of bitter amusement. You mean become the kind of person this family would finally consider successful? Someone who manages rich people's money instead of helping children learn to read? The accusation hung in the air because everyone at the table understood that Patricia's suggestion revealed the family's true values. They didn't care about Maria's happiness or fulfillment. They cared about her achieving the kind of success that would reflect well on them and align with their understanding of what constituted a worthwhile life. Carlos finally broke his silence, his voice carrying the weight of decades of quiet observation. I think what Maria is trying to tell you is that she's been successful all along. You just never bothered to notice because her success didn't look the way you expected it to. The observation from Maria's father struck at the heart of the evening's revelations. Maria had been building wealth, developing expertise, and creating professional opportunities, while her family dismissed her as a failure because her achievements didn't fit their narrow definition of success. Dr. Vaughn attempted to maintain some clinical objectivity despite the uncomfortable turn the conversation had taken. This certainly changes the context of our discussion about financial management. If you've been successfully managing investments and building a consulting business, then obviously you have more expertise than we realized. More expertise than you realized, Maria agreed.
but not more expertise than I've had for years. The knowledge and skills didn't appear magically when I won the lottery. I've been developing them through study and practice while this family assumed I was incapable of understanding anything more complex than library cataloging systems. Isabella made one final attempt to salvage some authority in the situation. Even so, the lottery money represents a scale that's unprecedented for anyone in this room. We were trying to help because we care about you, not because we wanted to take advantage of you. Maria looked around the table at faces that had become familiar again as the evening's revelation sank in. These were still her relatives, still people who shared her blood and her family history. But they were also people who had revealed themselves to be fundamentally incapable of respecting her autonomy or recognizing her capabilities. "I know you believe you were trying to help," she said, her voice carrying more sadness than anger. "But help that comes with the assumption that I'm incompetent isn't actually helpful. Support that requires me to surrender control of my own decisions isn't actually supportive. Love that's conditional on my willingness to let other people make choices for me isn't actually love." Roberto made one final attempt to reassert his position as family patriarch, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Maria, we're still your family. We still want what's best for you, even if we—"
I misunderstood your situation. What's best for me? Maria repeated slowly. According to whom? This is exactly the problem. You've never asked me what I want or what would make me happy. You've never bothered to learn about my actual interests or goals. You've spent 31 years telling me what's best for me based on your assumptions about who I am and what I'm capable of. She stood from the table and began gathering her documents, placing them back in the folder with the same methodical care she had used to remove them. "So let me tell you what I've decided about my lottery winnings and what I think is best for my future." The room fell completely silent as Maria prepared to deliver the decision that would determine not just how she would handle her newfound wealth, but what kind of relationship she would have with her family going forward. "First," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally claimed the right to make her own decisions, "I'm keeping complete control of my lottery money. I'll be working with Blackstone Wealth Management to structure my investments and handle the tax implications, because unlike family members who think caring about someone gives them the right to control their decisions, professional advisors understand that their job is to provide expertise while respecting my autonomy." Roberto opened his mouth to protest, but Maria continued without pausing. "Second, I'm taking the position at Blackstone, but only part-time. I'll continue working at the library 3 days a week because that work feeds my soul in ways that managing rich people's portfolios never could. I'm also expanding my independent consulting business to include financial literacy programs for low-income families, because I believe everyone deserves access to the kind of financial education that this family thinks should be reserved for people who already have money." The announcement that she would be combining her lottery winnings with her professional expertise to help economically disadvantaged families learn about investing and wealth building was so far outside Roberto's conception of appropriate wealth management that he seemed to struggle with formulating a response. "Third," Maria continued, "I'll be establishing a foundation, but not the kind you proposed. The Santos Family Foundation will provide college scholarships for first-generation students, fund financial literacy programs in underserved communities, and support public libraries throughout Connecticut. The foundation will be managed by professional trustees who understand that the point of philanthropy is helping people, not providing tax advantages for wealthy donors." Patricia attempted to interject with what sounded like enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful, Maria. We'd love to help with the foundation. I have experience with charity events, and Kenneth knows about nonprofit management." Maria's expression didn't change as she responded. "The foundation will be staffed by people who are hired based on their qualifications and their commitment to the mission, not their family relationships to the founder. If you're interested in working with the foundation, you're welcome to apply for positions like any other candidate." The suggestion that family members would need to apply for jobs rather than being automatically included in Maria's philanthropic activities was another blow to their sense of entitlement.
They had assumed that her success would naturally benefit them, providing opportunities and connections that would enhance their own social and professional standing. Fourth, Maria said, moving toward the conclusion of her prepared remarks, I'm purchasing a house. Not a mansion designed to impress people or demonstrate wealth, but a comfortable home with enough space for a real library and a garden where I can grow vegetables. I'm also buying my parents a house in the seaside community they've always loved, because unlike some family members, they've never made their love conditional on my financial status or my willingness to let them make decisions for me. Carlos and Carmen exchanged a look of surprise and gratitude, though neither seemed entirely comfortable with the idea of accepting such an expensive gift. Their discomfort with being the recipients of generosity stood in stark contrast to the entitlement other family members had displayed regarding Maria's money. Finally, Maria said, her voice carrying a note of finality that suggested the evening's revelations were drawing to a close, I want to address the issue of family relationships going forward. This conversation has been incredibly educational for me because it's shown me exactly how some members of this family view love, loyalty, and mutual support. Roberto made one last attempt to salvage some dignity from the situation. Maria, we've all learned things tonight that we didn't know before. Maybe we can start over now that we understand your situation better. Start over, Maria repeated, considering the phrase carefully. That's an interesting concept. Starting over would require acknowledging that the way you've treated me for 31 years was wrong, not just uninformed. It would require genuine apologies for decades of condescension and dismissal. It would require accepting that I have the right to make my own decisions about my life and my money, even if those decisions don't align with your values or expectations. The requirements she laid out for reconciliation were challenging because they demanded fundamental changes in how her family understood power dynamics and respect. Roberto would need to acknowledge that his authority as family patriarch didn't extend to controlling other adults' financial decisions. Isabella would need to admit that her condescending concern for Maria's welfare had been based on arrogance rather than genuine care. Miguel and Patricia would need to recognize that their sense of entitlement to family wealth was based on assumptions rather than rights. Isabella attempted to meet Maria's challenge with what appeared to be genuine remorse. You're right, we've treated you unfairly over the years, and we owe you apologies. I've been condescending and dismissive, and I'm sorry for that. I'd like to try to build a better relationship with you, if you're willing. The apology was more than Maria had expected, though she remained cautious about accepting it at face value. Apologies delivered under pressure of changed circumstances weren't necessarily indicative of genuine understanding or commitment to behavioral change. Miguel nodded in agreement with his sister's sentiment. I've made assumptions about you that were completely wrong, and I've treated you like you couldn't manage your own life. That was unfair and disrespectful, and I apologize too. Patricia joined the chorus of apologies with less conviction than her siblings, her voice carrying the tone of someone who understood that contrition was expected but wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. We all could have been more supportive and less judgmental. Family should be about acceptance, not constant criticism. Roberto remained silent, his face cycling through expressions that suggested an internal struggle between his desire to maintain authority and his recognition that his position had been fundamentally undermined by the evening's revelations. Finally, he spoke with less volume and conviction than anyone at the table had ever heard from him. I've been wrong about you, Maria, wrong about your capabilities, wrong about what you needed from family, wrong about my right to make decisions for other adults. I don't know how to be a different kind of person overnight, but I'm willing to try if you'll give me the chance. The admission was more than Maria had expected from her uncle, though it carried the weight of someone who understood that his entire worldview had been challenged. Roberto's identity as family patriarch was built on the assumption that wealth and business success gave him the wisdom and authority to guide other family members' lives. Maria's revelations had demolished that assumption completely.
Carmen finally spoke, her voice carrying the emotional weight of a mother who had watched her daughter navigate years of family dismissal with grace and determination. I'm proud of you, mija, not because you won the lottery or because you're successful with investments, but because you've stayed true to yourself despite all the pressure to be someone different. I should have spoken up more over the years when people were treating you unfairly. Carlos nodded in agreement with his wife's sentiment. Your mother's right. We knew you were capable of more than people gave you credit for, but we let them treat you like you weren't good enough because we didn't want to cause family conflict. That was wrong, and we're sorry too. The apologies from her parents carried more weight because they weren't motivated by changed financial circumstances. Carlos and Carmen were acknowledging their own failures to protect their daughter from family dynamics that had been harmful and unfair, even when they had lacked the resources to change those dynamics significantly. Maria looked around the table at faces that expressed various degrees of remorse, understanding, and continued confusion. The evening had been emotionally exhausting, but it had also been clarifying in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she was seeing her family members as they really were, rather than through the lens of childhood assumptions and adult wishful thinking. "I appreciate the apologies," she said finally, "and I believe some of them are genuine. But apologies are just words unless they're followed by changed behavior. I'm willing to try rebuilding relationships with family members who can respect my autonomy and treat me as an equal, but I'm not interested in maintaining relationships based on obligation or guilt." She picked up her purse and folder, preparing to leave a gathering that had changed everything about her understanding of family dynamics and her place within them. "I'll be moving forward with my own plans for my money and my life. Family members who want to be part of that future are welcome, but only if they can accept that I'm the one making the decisions." Roberto made one final attempt to salvage some connection to the financial opportunity that Maria represented. "If you ever need advice or want to discuss investment strategies, I hope you'll remember that family is here to help." Maria's smile carried more sadness than bitterness as she responded, "Uncle Roberto, if I ever need investment advice, I'll consult with the professionals at Blackstone who have been managing portfolios for ultra-high net worth clients for decades. But if I ever need to remember what it feels like to be valued for who I am rather than what I can provide, I hope I'll remember that some family members learned to offer that kind of love." The distinction between professional consultation and personal support highlighted the fundamental change in Maria's relationship with her extended family. She no longer needed their financial guidance or business connections, but she remained open to relationships based on genuine affection and mutual respect. As Maria walked toward the door, Isabella called after her with what sounded like genuine regret. "Maria, wait. I know we've damaged your trust, but I hope you'll give us chances to prove we can do better. I'd like to get to know who you really are instead of who I assumed you were." Maria paused at the threshold, considering her cousin's request. "Isabella, I'd like that too. But it will require you to be genuinely interested in my work at the library, my volunteer activities, and my actual goals and values, not just the parts of my life that align with your definition of success." The challenge was fair and direct. Isabella could rebuild a relationship with Maria, but only if she was willing to value and respect interests that she had previously dismissed as inadequate or unambitious. "I understand," Isabella replied, her voice carrying more humility than anyone in the family had ever heard from her. "I'd like to try." Miguel stepped forward with the expression of someone who had genuinely been changed by the evening's revelations. "Maria, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the chance to really know my respect. Would you be willing to tell me about your investment research methodology sometime? Not because I want business advice, but because I'm genuinely curious about how you developed expertise that impressed Blackstone Wealth Management." The request was different from the others because it acknowledged Maria's professional accomplishments as genuinely impressive, rather than treating them as surprising anomalies. Miguel was asking to learn from her rather than offering to teach her, a reversal of the traditional family dynamic. "I'd be happy to share what I've learned," Maria replied, "but only if you understand that my real passion is the financial literacy work I do with low-income families. That's the part of my consulting business that I care about most, even though it's the least profitable." Miguel nodded with what appeared to be genuine understanding. "I think I'm beginning to realize that profit isn't the only measure of meaningful work." Patricia remained quiet, her expression suggesting that she was still processing the magnitude of change that the evening had brought to her understanding of family relationships and social dynamics. The revelation that Maria had been building wealth and professional expertise while the family dismissed her as unsuccessful had shattered assumptions that Patricia wasn't sure how to rebuild. Roberto walked Maria to the door with the slow gait of someone who had aged considerably over the course of a single evening. "Maria, I know I have no right to ask for anything after tonight,
but I hope you'll consider giving me the chance to learn how to be a better uncle and family member." The request was humble, in a way that Roberto had never been before, stripped of the authority and assumptions that had characterized his family relationships for decades. I don't know how to respect other people's autonomy when I've spent my whole life believing that caring about someone gave me the right to control their decisions. But I'm willing to learn if you'll teach me." Maria studied her uncle's face, seeing exhaustion and genuine confusion where she had previously seen arrogance and entitlement. "Uncle Roberto, the fact that you recognize the problem is actually a promising start. But change takes time, and trust has to be rebuilt through actions, not just words." "I understand," Roberto replied, "and I want you to know that regardless of what happens between us going forward, I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished. Not just the lottery money, but the business you built and the expertise you developed while we were all too blind to see it." The acknowledgement was more than Maria had ever expected to hear from her uncle, though it came at the cost of a family dinner that had revealed uncomfortable truths about relationships she had spent 31 years trying to navigate successfully. As Maria drove home through the quiet streets of Hartford, she reflected on an evening that had changed everything about her understanding of family dynamics and her place within them. The lottery money had given her financial independence, but the confrontation with her family had given her something more valuable: the confidence to define her own worth and the clarity to distinguish between relationships based on genuine care and those based on obligation or opportunity. Her apartment felt different when she returned, less like a modest refuge from family judgment and more like the home of someone who had finally claimed the right to make her own decisions about her life and values. The books lining her walls represented knowledge she had pursued for its own sake, not because it would impress anyone or advance her social status. The simple furniture she had refinished herself reflected creativity and resourcefulness rather than inability to afford better options. The lottery ticket that had started this transformation lay on her kitchen table, a small piece of paper that had revealed far more about her family than about her own character. She had won $347 million, but more importantly, she had discovered the difference between people who loved her for who she was and people who valued her for what she could provide. The phone calls that came over the following weeks revealed which family members had been genuinely moved by the evening's revelations and which had simply recalibrated their approach to accessing her newfound wealth.
Isabella followed through on her promise to learn about Maria's actual interests, asking thoughtful questions about library programs and expressing genuine interest in the financial literacy work. Miguel surprised everyone by volunteering to help with the Foundation's scholarship program, bringing organizational skills without trying to assert control over decision-making. Patricia's attempts at reconciliation felt more perfunctory, focused on maintaining family appearances rather than building genuine understanding. Roberto struggled visibly with changing patterns that had defined his identity for decades, but made consistent efforts to ask about Maria's preferences rather than making assumptions about what she should want. Maria's parents adjusted to their new financial security with the same grace and humility they had shown throughout their daughter's childhood. Carlos retired from the postal service but continued volunteering with literacy programs, finding purpose in work that served his community rather than his bank account. Carmen used her newfound free time to expand her volunteer activities, teaching sewing skills to women who were trying to develop employment capabilities. The house Maria purchased reflected her values rather than her bank account. Located in a diverse neighborhood near downtown Hartford, it featured a large library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a kitchen designed for serious cooking rather than entertaining, and gardens where she grew vegetables that she shared with neighbors and local food banks. Her work with Blackstone Wealth Management proved as fulfilling as she had hoped, providing opportunities to apply her research skills to complex financial challenges while maintaining the boundary between professional expertise and personal values. Her clients appreciated her methodical approach and her focus on long-term stability rather than aggressive growth strategies that carried unnecessary risks. But it was the expansion of her financial literacy programs that brought Maria the greatest satisfaction. Working with families who had never had access to investment education, she discovered the profound impact that knowledge could have on people's sense of empowerment and possibility. Teaching a single mother how to set up an emergency fund or helping a factory worker understand retirement planning options provided the kind of meaningful connection that made all the family drama worthwhile. The Santos Family Foundation became a model for how inherited or unexpected wealth could be used to address systemic inequalities rather than simply providing tax advantages for wealthy donors. The scholarship program supported first-generation college students who faced the same kind of financial barriers that Maria had navigated with library wages and secondhand textbooks. The financial literacy initiatives reached communities that had been systematically excluded from wealth-building opportunities by lack of access to information and resources. 6 months after the confrontation at Roberto's dinner table, Maria received a letter that brought the transformation full circle. The Hartford Public Library Board of Directors had voted to name the new community education wing in her honor, recognizing both her years of service and her foundation's support for expanded programming. The Maria Santos Community Learning Center would house computer labs, meeting rooms for financial literacy classes, and a collection of resources focused on economic empowerment and career development. The dedication ceremony brought together library colleagues, foundation beneficiaries, Blackstone partners, and family members who had learned to value Maria's actual achievements rather than measuring her against expectations she had never accepted. Roberto gave a brief speech acknowledging his niece's vision and dedication, managing to praise her accomplishments without claiming credit for recognizing her potential. Isabella attended with genuine enthusiasm, having discovered through their rebuilt relationship that Maria's work was far more complex and impactful than she had ever imagined. Miguel brought his teenage daughter, hoping to inspire her with an example of success that wasn't measured solely by financial accumulation. Patricia remained somewhat distant, though she attended family gatherings without the condescending attitude that had characterized her previous interactions with Maria. The relationship would never be close, but it had achieved a level of mutual respect that allowed for peaceful coexistence during family events. Maria's parents sat in the front row of the dedication ceremony with expressions of quiet pride that had nothing to do with lottery winnings or investment returns. They were celebrating a daughter who had remained true to her values despite enormous pressure to conform to other people's definitions of success. As Maria addressed the gathering, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from family disappointment to genuine fulfillment. The lottery money had provided financial security and independence, but it had also served as a catalyst for claiming her right to define success on her own terms. "The most valuable lesson I've learned," she told the audience, "is that true wealth isn't measured by bank account balances or investment portfolios. It's measured by the freedom to pursue work that has meaning, to build relationships based on genuine respect, and to use whatever resources you have to create opportunities for others." The speech was modest in tone, but revolutionary in its implications. In a society that equated worth with wealth and measured success by accumulation, Maria had chosen a different path. She had used her financial windfall to expand her ability to serve her community rather than to escape from it. She leveraged her unexpected wealth to amplify work she had already been doing rather than to adopt the lifestyle her family had assumed she would want. The transformation was complete, but it hadn't been the transformation anyone had expected. Maria Santos hadn't become wealthy enough to join her family's social circles. Instead, she had become powerful enough to create her own definition of value and success, building a life that honored her authentic interests and commitments rather than other people's expectations and assumptions. The lottery ticket that had started everything remained in a frame on her office wall, not as a trophy or reminder of good fortune, but as a symbol of the moment when she had finally claimed the right to be herself without apology or compromise. $347 million had bought her many things, but the most precious was the freedom to live according to her own values and to define wealth as the ability to make a positive difference in other people's lives. Years later, when people asked about her secret to happiness despite coming from a family that had never understood her, Maria would smile and share the lesson that had taken 31 years and a lottery ticket to learn. True success wasn't about proving yourself to people who had underestimated you. It was about becoming so secure in your own worth that their opinions no longer had the power to define your sense of self. The family gatherings continued, but they were different now. Roberto no longer held court as the undisputed authority on success and achievement.
Isabella contributed medical expertise without assuming her profession made her superior to relatives in other fields. Miguel shared business insights without dismissing work that didn't generate substantial profits. Maria attended these gatherings as herself, confident in her choices and secure in her values. She no longer needed her family's approval or validation, which paradoxically made it easier for them to offer genuine respect and affection. The relationships that survived were stronger because they were based on acceptance rather than expectation, understanding rather than assumption. The lottery money continued to grow under Blackstone's management, but it remained a tool for pursuing Maria's goals rather than an end in itself. She lived comfortably but not ostentatiously, traveled to places that interested her rather than impressed others, and continued working at the library because it fed her soul in ways that managing portfolios never could. The Santos Family Foundation expanded its reach, providing scholarships to hundreds of students and financial literacy education to thousands of families. The impact was measured not in dollars dispersed, but in lives changed, opportunities created, and cycles of poverty interrupted through access to knowledge and resources. Maria's story became local legend, though she avoided publicity and rarely spoke about her lottery win. When forced to discuss it, she emphasized the importance of the work she had been doing before the windfall, rather than the dramatic change in her financial circumstances. The money had amplified her impact, but it hadn't created her purpose or defined her worth. The quiet librarian who had once been dismissed as a family failure had become exactly she had always been, someone who understood that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased, inherited, or demanded. They could only be earned through authentic relationships, meaningful work, and the courage to remain true to yourselves regardless of other people's expectations or assumptions. The transformation was complete, but it wasn't the one her family had anticipated. Maria Santos hadn't become successful according to their definition. Instead, she had proven that their definition
Fundamentally flawed. Success, Maria had learned, wasn't about accumulating enough wealth to impress people who had never bothered to understand your actual values. It wasn't about achieving the kind of status that would finally earn respect from family members who had spent decades withholding it. True success was about building a life that aligned with your authentic self, using whatever resources you had to create positive change, and surrounding yourself with people who valued you for who you were rather than what you could provide. The lottery ticket had given her financial independence, but the confrontation with her family had given her something far more valuable: the clarity to distinguish between relationships worth preserving and those that had been maintained out of obligation rather than genuine affection. She had learned that love without respect was meaningless, and that support that came with conditions wasn't actually supportive. As she sat in her library office years later, surrounded by books that had shaped her thinking and photographs of foundation beneficiaries who had achieved their educational goals, Maria reflected on the unexpected gift that winning the lottery had actually been. Not the money itself, though that had created opportunities she had used well, but the catalyst it had provided for finally claiming her right to define her own worth and success. The quiet librarian who had once been dismissed as the family disappointment had become exactly what she had always been: someone who understood that the most meaningful achievements couldn't be measured in dollars or status symbols. They could only be measured in lives touched, knowledge shared, and the courage to remain authentic in a world that constantly pressured people to become someone else's version of successful. The phone on her desk rang, interrupting her reflection. It was a call from a foundation scholarship recipient who had just been accepted to medical school, calling to share the news with the woman whose generosity had made her education possible. As Maria listened to the young woman's excitement and gratitude, she smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally learned the difference between being wealthy and being truly rich. The lottery had made her wealthy, but discovering her own worth, independent of other people's approval or assumptions, had made her rich in ways that no amount of money could ever match. That was the real fortune she had won, and unlike lottery tickets, it could never be lost or taken away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.